These photographs were never meant to be seen together. More than 60 lost images from the Great Depression reveal America's hardest years between 1929 and 1939, as they actually looked on the ground. In these frames, there is no hindsight, only waiting, movement, and routines breaking down in real time. Lines form without answers, homes feel temporary, and stability disappears quietly. One image later in this sequence captures a detail that explains why these years felt endless while they were happening. A detail that changes how the entire decade is understood. This video examines more than 60 real photographs to trace how the Great Depression unfolded across streets, farms, camps, and homes, showing hardship and response as they appeared side by side. Watched in order, the images reveal how daily life changed long before recovery was certain. The early years of the Great Depression were first felt not in headlines, but on the streets, where ordinary routines quietly fell apart. In public spaces like this, people gathered with no clear sense of how long they would be waiting. Jobs had vanished quickly, and many who once worked regular hours now stood in lines with nothing to do but wait. The scene reflects how suddenly the economic collapse interrupted everyday life, turning sidewalks and parks into places of uncertainty rather than movement. Food lines became part of the daily landscape during these years. People waited patiently for basic meals, often in full view of the public. Hunger was no longer hidden inside homes. It appeared openly on streets and near relief centers, reshaping how survival itself was experienced during the crisis. Living conditions also changed as families adjusted to shrinking resources. Temporary shelters, crowded housing, and makeshift structures became common sights. These environments show how poverty influenced not just income, but the very spaces where people slept, gathered, and tried to maintain a sense of normal life. Environmental hardship added another layer to the crisis. In regions affected by drought and dust storms, families packed what they could carry and moved on. These moments captured displacement driven not only by economic collapse, but by conditions that made staying impossible. Alongside hardship, organized relief and work efforts began to appear. People participated in public projects and assistance programs designed to stabilize daily life. These scenes mark the early stages of response, showing how recovery efforts were documented as part of the same historical record as suffering. Together, these images form a grounded record of how the Depression unfolded at street level before RICO. As the crisis deepened, hardship began to move, carrying families and workers far from the places they once called home. Travel like this became a necessity rather than a choice. With belongings packed tightly and destinations uncertain, families set out in search of work or stability wherever it might be found. These moments reflect how economic pressure turned roads into lifelines, even when the future offered no guarantees. Temporary camps emerged along roadsides and near job sites, offering only short-term shelter. Life in these spaces was unsettled, marked by constant movement and waiting. The camps show a daily reality defined by transition, where home was never meant to last. Work was often found in fields, where labor was demanding and rarely secure. Migrant workers moved with the seasons, taking whatever jobs were available. These scenes reveal survival built on uncertainty, with income tied closely to movement and timing rather than permanence. Cities felt the strain as newcomers arrived looking for opportunity or assistance. Crowded streets and waiting areas became common sights. This shift shows how migration pressure reached beyond rural areas, reshaping urban spaces already struggling under economic stress. Behind the movement and statistics were families adjusting to constant change. Quiet moments between parents and children reflect both strain and resilience. These images bring the focus back to daily life, showing endurance carried forward despite instability. Together, these scenes trace how displacement became a defining part of everyday life during the 1,930 seconds. In rural America, the Depression took shape through the land itself, where work, weather, and survival became tightly bound together. Scenes like this reflect the strain placed on farms during the 1,930 seconds. Fields produced less, buildings fell into disrepair, and daily work became harder to sustain. Rural life was disrupted not by sudden closure, but by slow decline, as livelihoods tied to the land began to fail. Dust and drought transformed familiar landscapes into hostile environments. Storms darkened skies, settled inside homes, and stripped fields of usable soil. These conditions show how environmental stress intensified existing hardship, leaving families with fewer options to remain where they were. Inside rural homes, scarcity shaped daily routines. Meals were limited, clothing was worn, and life followed a careful rhythm of conservation. The image reflects endurance built into ordinary moments, where survival depended on adapting every part of daily life. For some, remaining on the land was no longer possible. Families prepared to leave with what they could carry, weighing uncertainty against necessity. These moments capture the difficult choice between staying in failing conditions and moving toward an unknown future. Even as farms struggled, efforts to stabilize rural life began to appear. Organized assistance and work projects aimed to slow the damage and restore some balance. These scenes remind us that the era was recorded during both collapse and attempts to recover. Taken together, these images show how environmental pressure reshaped rural life and narrowed the choices people could make in the 1,930 seconds. As the Depression continued, relief and work programs became part of the public landscape, shaping how hardship and response were seen side by side. Outside buildings like this, lines formed as people waited to register for assistance. Relief offices became familiar places, woven into daily routines during the 1,930 seconds. The scene reflects how support systems operated in plain view, managing widespread need through formal, organized processes. Food relief was delivered through direct, practical action. Meals were served, supplies were handed out, and people moved through these spaces with quiet efficiency. These moments show survival support as it actually appeared on the ground, measured in portions, packages, and shared waiting. Work relief programs placed people into visible labor across public spaces. Roads were built, sites were cleared, and crews carried out assigned tasks. Photographs like this often emphasized activity and structure, presenting recovery as something tangible and underway. In some images, assistance and hardship appear together. Relief projects operate alongside signs of poverty that have not yet faded. This contrast reflects the scale of the crisis, showing how help arrived gradually while need remained widespread. Other photographs were clearly made for documentation. Their careful framing suggests record-keeping rather than storytelling, intended for reports or archives. Many such images remain scattered across collections, contributing to how the era was preserved in fragments rather than a single, unified record. Together, these scenes show how relief was lived, worked, and documented during the long years of the Depression. As the Depression wore on, the crisis reached directly into where people lived, turning housing itself into a daily uncertainty. Evictions like this became common scenes during the early 1,930 seconds. Belongings were placed outdoors, sometimes with little notice, as families were forced to leave their homes. The image reflects how economic collapse translated into sudden displacement, making shelter as unstable as employment. In response, makeshift communities began to form on vacant land and city edges. Simple shelters were built from available materials, offering minimal protection but a sense of shared survival. These spaces show how homelessness became visible and organized into informal settlements. Inside crowded housing, conditions grew increasingly strained. Families shared tight rooms, and buildings showed signs of neglect. This view brings the crisis indoors, revealing poverty not only in public spaces, but within the walls meant to provide safety and rest. For those without shelter, public spaces became places of rest. Benches, sidewalks, and sheltered corners were used whenever possible. These scenes contrast sharply with pre-Depression life, showing how survival moved into the open as private spaces disappeared. Alongside visible hardship, housing-related relief efforts began to appear. Assistance was offered near shelters and affected neighborhoods, sometimes in improvised ways. These images connect the housing crisis to organized response, documenting both need and attempts to address it. Together, these moments show how the Depression reshaped where people lived, turning homes into one of the central struggles of the era. For many Americans, the Depression became a daily exercise in endurance, shaped by small decisions, improvised work, and careful use of what little was available. Work like this filled the gap left by disappearing jobs. People turned to informal labor, collecting scraps, selling small goods, or taking on whatever tasks could bring in a few cents. These scenes show survival built on adaptability rather than stability. Inside homes, scarcity shaped everyday routines. Meals were simple, supplies were stretched, and households learned to make do with less. The image reflects survival as a quiet, ongoing process, carried out around kitchen tables and small domestic spaces. Children grew up surrounded by the realities of hardship. Worn clothing and crowded conditions became part of daily life, influencing how childhood was experienced. These moments show how the crisis extended into family life, shaping early years through limitation and uncertainty. In some neighborhoods, survival became a shared effort. Neighbors gathered, resources were exchanged, and local charity played a visible role. These scenes highlight collective coping, where community connections softened the impact of widespread scarcity. Toward the late 1930s, certain images begin to suggest gradual change. Organized work returns in limited forms, and routines show signs of stabilization. These moments do not signal full recovery, but they reflect endurance and the slow rebuilding of daily life. Taken together, these scenes show how survival during the Depression unfolded through ordinary actions repeated day after day. Not every image from the Great Depression became iconic. Many were created simply to record events as they unfolded, then stored, filed, and quietly preserved. Photographs like this were often made with documentation in mind. The framing, caption style, and careful composition suggest an image meant for records rather than wide circulation. It reflects how much of the era was captured for files and reports, not for public attention. Many images came from local settings far from major cities. Small towns documented their own struggles, relief efforts, and daily hardship. These photographs remain tied to regional collections, preserving stories that rarely entered national memory. Other photographs circulated through reprints, cropped, resized, or placed into publications. They often lost clear attribution over time. This process helped spread images widely, but it also separated them from their original context and recognition. Some documentation focused on everyday scenes rather than dramatic moments. Ordinary work, housing, and movement were recorded without emphasis. These quieter images stand apart from famous photographs, yet they offer an equally valuable view of daily life during the era. Together, these kinds of photographs form a record created in real time. Lines, scarcity, and public routines were captured as they happened. They remind us that the Depression was documented continuously, even when many of its images remained largely unseen. This section shows how history was preserved not only through famous images, but through thousands of quieter records spread across archives and collections. By the end of the 1,930 seconds, the Depression was already history in the making, recorded frame by frame as it unfolded rather than remembered afterward. Images like this bring the story back to the street level. Lines, worn clothing, and visible strain reflect what the crisis looked like in ordinary moments. It serves as a reminder that the Depression was lived day to day, long before it was studied or summarized. As hardship continued, organized relief and work programs remained active. Crews carried out public tasks, and assistance followed structured routines. These scenes show response unfolding alongside suffering, captured while the outcome was still uncertain. Displacement did not end all at once. Families were still on the move, carrying belongings and adjusting to temporary living arrangements. This image reflects how recovery arrived unevenly, leaving many caught between instability and limited opportunity. Other photographs from the late 1,930 seconds suggest a quieter shift. Work begins to return in small ways, and daily routines appear more settled. The scene offers contrast without erasing the damage, showing adjustment rather than full recovery. Some images feel deliberately preserved, framed as records rather than moments. Their careful composition points to an awareness that history was being documented in real time. Together, these photographs form a lasting visual account of a national crisis as it unfolded. These final images reinforce why the era still resonates. Photography captured both collapse and adjustment as they happened, leaving a record that continues to shape how the Great Depression is understood. Seen together, these lost photographs show the Great Depression as a decade of constant adjustment rather than a single collapse. From 1,929 to 1,939, ordinary life was reshaped by waiting, movement, and uncertainty, all recorded as it happened. These images preserve America's hardest years before they were understood as history. Which moment here most clearly shows life continuing inside instability? Viewers who want to see more recovered visual records may choose to follow the channel for future archives.